I am Anne McMillan from the Neurodiverse Connection, and here with me today is my friend Nick, who is autistic. And we are going to be talking about growth and neurodiverse intimate relationships and trying to be really positive because we know that there are a lot of people out there who are struggling in these relationships and looking for some ways to find the happiness that they deserve. So, Nick, please introduce yourself.
My name's Nick. I live out in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm 35. I was diagnosed with autism as an adult, so it was when I think I was either 29 or 30, can't remember exactly. And at the time, I was in a marriage. I'm divorced now, but I was in a marriage, and I had 3 kids, and I had lived my whole life undiagnosed until that point. And been a pretty wild journey throughout
Yeah.
the process. I've known Anne for about a year, and we've talked through a lot of different stuff and whatnot. And at this point, I'm like probably the happiest I've ever been. So it's worked out really well for me. Even though my marriage ended and whatnot, it's been an amazing journey, and I'm in a great relationship now. So it's all good.
Yeah, and as Nick and I were getting ready for this podcast, we talked about wanting to set out there that maybe we can redefine success as finding happiness and moving towards good places where we're finding peace and success not always needing to be defined as staying in a marriage. So that's just our framework for this particular podcast. We know that many of you do choose to stay in a marriage, and that's, of course, also fine too. And we also want to, of course, assert that there are other choices for those of you who take them. Um,
I think I can speak to something too. Like in the well, I worked on myself after I got diagnosed with autism. Started to try to figure out like ways to understand my partner better. She was non-autistic, or she's not even, I mean, she was, neurotypical, doesn't have any other diagnosis or anything like that. And we tried to work through things, and originally my intention was to try to stay in the marriage and make it all work.
right.
And that was what I set out on in the beginning, thinking that was the move. Stay together for the family, try to kind of stay in love, that sort of stuff. And it ended up working out better for me to actually get out of the marriage. And for it worked out better for both of us. Now we have a better co-parenting relationship. We have a great relationship, and we're still friends. And it took, I think if we had both tried to stay in the marriage, it would have been just worse for both of us in our lives where we are right now. So I think it is definitely important to, like, keep your options open when you start exploring that.
Right. And many of the people who come to me who are my clients were married very young. And I know that that
Mhm.
is true for you, Nick. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, I let's see, so I'm 35 now. I met my former partner when I was 19. So, we met
Right.
young, started dating, and, before you know it, she ended up getting pregnant while I was in college, so it's been a whole journey. So, I have,
Right.
my oldest child is 13, and so we started having kids young. We got married pretty young, and, you know, everyone like, we know now that, like, your brain's not even fully developed until you're, like, in your mid-20s, and I feel
Right.
like most people I know, when they start to get around the age of 30, they go through some pretty serious transitions in life, and their mentality and everything, and that's definitely true for me. And when I think about it, it's like we entered this relationship, I mean, I was only a 2nd year in college when we met, so we were pretty hadn't done a lot of work on ourselves. There's a lot of unresolved issues that we had from our childhood, and, different things from our adolescence. There's just so much work that hadn't been done. We didn't really know exactly who we were at that point. If I think back to who I was when we met, it's much different than who I have become. And and so I think in a lot of relationships, not just autistic, but in general, when people get
Right.
together young like that, it's inevitable that they're going to experience some turbulence later on when they start to go through different growth periods in their lives. They start to have their ideas might change. Anything from spiritual to political ideas, things like that. Interests change. And so, amongst all of the differences in your changing opinions, your different interests, and then also traumas, like you're gonna go through that period where you start to kind of diverge a little bit. Sometimes people get closer together over time, but a lot of people start to diverge. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what happened for us. Like at a certain level, like things were getting really stressful, and there was always some disconnect in the relationship where she wasn't getting what she needed from me, I wasn't getting what I needed from her. We were
Right.
butting heads over certain things. Um it's not like one person was in the wrong or something like that. It's just that we both our needs, we didn't even understand really our needs. We probably hadn't even worked on ourselves to really understand them enough at the time.
Right. And
So,
I think I was going to say, I think it's really common, like you said, when people hit their mid-30s, and especially when they've been married young, for these relationships to diverge. And then there's an added component to that in the neurodiverse relationships because the people have two different brains and they're growing in different ways because autism affects the way people develop. And so, therefore,
yep.
we can expect that development happens differently. And Nick has some thoughts about how autistic people are developing and what they can do to make their lives better by taking advantage of this time in life when these marriage crises come up and development is happening certainly for the neurotypical person, yet some autistic people feel that they are doomed, so to speak, to not develop.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I mean, that's a big one that comes up. Like, if you look on just online forums, if you read books about the topic and whatnot, there's so much information out there that suggests that if you're autistic, you're pretty much in a box that is go and you're gonna be stuck with certain criteria, which is not I've found not true. Like, a lot of it is that, there's, like, some narratives out there that say you're never gonna be able to put yourselves in people's shoes. You're always gonna have mind blindness. You're not gonna be able to put yourselves in the shoes of someone else and all this stuff, but that's not really the case. It's just that when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you sometimes misinterpret how you might react to something because or how they might react to something because you're thinking, "Okay, well, this is how I would react to it." But
Right.
it's funny because the truth is, like, if that's the case, if you process things a little bit different than a neurotypical, then they probably can't put themselves in your shoes very well. You can't put yourselves in their shoes very well until you work on that and start to understand, how other people process information and whatnot. So, in the earlier days, I would say I fell into probably a lot of the narratives and traps of that do exist. Like, I probably did have a hard time. I definitely did have a hard time putting myself in other people's shoes. Maybe I would say the wrong thing in rough situations, all that kind of stuff. But later on, when I started to work on myself and develop, I became really good at holding space for other people. Became good at putting myself in other people's shoes and being caring and that sort of thing. All the stuff that they say that you're not going to be capable of as an autistic person. And so I think that what it comes down to though is not feeling doomed or feeling like a victim or oh I live in this world it's so hard as an autistic. It's That's not the right mindset. The right mindset is to just take accountability for where you have some deficiencies, take accountability for you know, just how it is. Just like my friends who have ADD take accountability for the fact that they have a hard time staying on task and things like that. You have to be able to take accountability for it and then work on those things and develop it. And once you start to develop those different skills, even though it'll feel like masking at first, it'll eventually just become second nature. It's just like anything else. It's when you're learning how to public speak, for example, it's always nerve-wracking at first, and it always feels like you're faking it. But then later on, you start to develop it, and it's not even hard to do anymore. And I think it's pretty similar when it comes to understanding how to put yourselves in other people's shoes, how to hold space, how not to put yourself in a victim mindset. It's just good all around for everybody, not just autistics.
Right, right, and it's certainly something that the non-autistic partners need to be thinking about too. There is this dynamic going on in these neurodiverse relationships where, in a lot of ways, we're gaslighting each other, and it always feels like the other person is doing something wrong, and the self is the victim. And when that happens, the relationship can't move forward and grow, and people find themselves in a spot where they are defining success in life as staying in this relationship, yet they are in a place in the relationship where there's no growth happening and there's a lot of incompatibility. And it can turn into some really, really negative, repetitive dynamics that are really hurtful to both partners. Um,
Yep.
One of them that's super common is the non-autistic partner feeling guilty if they think that they want to leave, or feeling like they have to stay no matter what because their partner has autism and therefore nothing is their partner's fault. And that
Mhm.
sense of guilt really is quite patronizing, frankly, to the autistic partner. I mean, who wants to be in a marriage with someone who is only there because they're forcing themselves to stay there and they feel guilty about leaving?
Oh, yeah, and you experience it. I mean, when that is the dynamic, like, I can speak to that, like, in my own situation, like, you feel it, like, from on the autistic side, you feel that it's, like, inauthentic and that it's not right, like, you know something's off when it's like that and there is that dynamic, and then you also start to, that whole thing creates a problem too, because then there starts to be resentment, and I feel
Right.
like if you're forcing yourself to be in a situation, there's gonna be resentment on either side. There's going to be, um there's also gonna be that, like, nitpicky type of thing where you're going to start, like, seeing very minor things as problems and getting annoyed by minor things because you're not happy overall. You're trying to force
Right.
yourself to be happy and you're not happy. And so I think that that can happen on both sides. It can be really frustrating. And one thing that you said to me once that I think has kind of stuck with me throughout the whole path on my journey has been that that the neurotypicals tend to move in really big oscillations, like big waves of up
Right.
and down. As they
Yeah.
move upward in life, it's a up and down on its way up, um, like a high frequency or something, and like or whatever, like a just the bands are moving really, really extreme, and there's a waves of emotion that are at a high, then waves of emotion that are at a low, and it can be really confusing on the autistic side because we tend to move a little bit more, not exactly linear, but our oscillations are tighter. Like
Right.
it's maybe a little bit of up and down, but it's not as extreme. And so for us, it can feel pretty inconsistent when you're dealing with someone who's like, "Oh, I love you," and then all of a sudden they don't love you. Or, "Oh, I wanna hold you," and then they don't wanna even look at you.
Right.
Like
Right.
it really is confusing when you're dealing with that on the from the neurotypical side, but what's what's interesting though is that, I don't it's not like that in my relationship that I'm in now with and I'm not with someone who's autistic, and it's not like that now, so I do think that sometimes we tend to attract the extremes, especially when we're young, and I think that possibly some autistic and non-autistic relationships are an autistic person and then a very, like, I don't wanna say this in a rude way, but, like, almost like a very, like, emotionally volatile person on the other side, and somehow they end up attracting each other because the autistic person seems very stable, very, like, linear, not too whatever, and then the other person is more volatile and the opposites can attract that way, but it's not always the best attraction, especially when it happens at a young age. So, I think
Right.
that
Right.
I think that's also happening in here because I do know a lot of people who are non-autistic who the oscillations in their pattern is not as extreme as others.
Right. Oh, definitely, definitely, and those oscillations are really accentuated by the sense of guilt and like, "Oh, I should be feeling like I love him, and that would be the right thing for me to do. So now I'm going to give him a lot of positive attention, but, oh, wow, this isn't feeling good. I feel bad inside myself." The guilt comes down. "Oh, but I shouldn't be guilty, so now I'm going to give him positive attention," and just around and around and around and back and forth. And a
Yep.
lot of, as Nick was addressing autistic people going on growth journeys and figuring out how to find this sense that there really is hope. The neurotypicals are going on growth journeys as well, and part of that growth journey is leading them, in many cases, to more insight about why they got married in the first place and what happened when they were young, and possibly that this isn't the right relationship for them, which then they will be oscillating on that growth journey, but then they will also have these emotional oscillations due to the guilt cycle that's going in and out and in and out. And
Yeah.
a really interesting thing is that in my own research, I was able to demonstrate that a lot of the neurodiverse marriages are between someone who has a very high level of autism traits and someone who has a very low level of autism traits. The quote neurotypicals who had a lower level of autism traits were the ones
Mhm.
who were married to the autistic people, and their level of autism traits was significantly lower than the neurotypicals that were married to each other. And that
Yeah.
might be, or I guess I should say, is different than emotional volatility. Having a very, very low level of autism traits is really more having a very high level of social awareness and a high level of body empathy. And that's something I'll talk more about elsewhere. But right now, I am thinking that these people, they are also neurodivergent. They're not typical,
Yeah.
and they are often the people that autistic people do end up marrying, at least the first time when they're very young. And one
Yep.
possibility, emotional volatility aside, is that Nick's new partner is maybe not a high body empathy neurodivergent, if that makes sense. She may be more of a neurotypical. But, regardless, this isn't about any one relationship or one person. It's more about understanding these concepts and how we can
Yeah.
apply them in order to find the happiness that we deserve. I think it would be worth it, Nick, if you have some specific examples of some of the things that you did to find growth that helped you come to a place where you were able to make changes in yourself and find the happiness that you now have.
Yeah, totally. So I think for me, because I started having kids so young, you just kind of end up in a fight or flight
Right.
survival mode. So you don't really work on yourself. You kind of can't. Like I worked on my career because I had to make money, but you don't have a lot of time to you don't have a lot of time and effort that you could just put into yourself. It's like you're trying to figure out what do I do in my marriage? What do I do for my kids? And you know, it's it's hard to really just be alone with your own thoughts a lot of the time when you're going through that. So when I later on when I started to when I when we started to really have some issues and then I got my autism diagnosis, I knew that I was going to have to start working on things a lot more and figure out what to do about it?
Right.
What to do about these differences? Are they reconcilable? Like it was all a lot to learn. So I think for me, I I was also an entrepreneur, so I also owned a business and I was doing that. So that was another intense thing. I think that being a parent and being an entrepreneur probably helped me a pretty significant amount on my journey because
Mhm.
when I started to well, really, part of what led to my diagnosis was when I started managing people. I realized that there were some issues in my management style. And like people looked up to me for what I could do in my work, but I had some flaws in the way I would handle things. Like I might tell somebody something that I thought was totally a logical thing to say, but it would hurt their feelings, something
Right.
about their performance or whatever. Or I just might not pick up on the fact that they were getting uncomfortable about something. And at first I didn't really know what was going on. And then later on when I got my diagnosis, it all made more sense because I got some of the lowest scores you can actually get on some of the tests that you take.
Right.
Some of them I did fine, but a few of them I had a really hard time with tone and facial expression and understanding the connection and certain things like that. And
Mhm.
so what I did was I started to just just ask more questions of other people that I knew, people that knew me pretty well about how I come off, things like that. Like I asked family members that knew me from a young age, and obviously they didn't know I was autistic, but they always just thought I was a little bit strange. So we started to, I started to get some feedback from other people. Um, I started to even talk to people I managed a lot more, and I just started to read more books on management, connection, relationships. I went through just a lot of materials to learn as much as I could. And
Right.
then and then I think it just came down to, similar to when you're growing a business and you have to have like a growth mindset and read books about entrepreneurship. I just kind of took the same approach. Like,
Right.
as autistics, we tend to have special interests and get obsessed with things. I just made one of my obsessions like understanding like neurotypicals. I just made that like something that I was obsessed with. And
Right.
then I was able to just develop. And now it's like I understand body language, facial expression, all that stuff at more of a second nature style versus being like, oh, I'm looking at somebody and I have to like guess what they're thinking. It's not like that anymore. There's no guessing anymore. I can tell now, and
Right.
it's much better than it was.
Do you feel like
It
you
didn't
use
happen fast.
sorry, I was just sorry to interrupt you there. Do you feel like you're
No, go
using
ahead.
your memory as much? I mean, one of the things that autistic people do, at least one way to talk about the masking is that they're memorizing the way the different facial expressions what different facial expressions mean and responding to the memorization of it. Do you feel like there's still a that there's a memory component in that or that it's something that you're picking up on immediately?
I mean, for me, I don't think that I'm like have like a memory bank of facial expressions and I'm like figuring out matching them up.
Right.
It's nothing like that. I think it's tough because like, since autism is such a spectrum and we all have different traits, like
Right.
it might be harder for some than others. Like some of what I'm saying will probably resonate really well with some people, but some people, who knows? Like, and especially with the testing, it's like there's so many tests that go through it, like during the diagnosis, and some people score worse than others on certain parts of the test. Some people do better on certain parts. Some people have more sensory issues and less like facial expression processing issues, and there's like so many different nuances to it.
Right.
But I think that for me, it's not even like it's almost like in the beginning it started off as like masking, like I was trying to just fit in almost a little bit better and
Mhm.
at first some of it seemed weird to me. Like it's like okay, I have to explain something to somebody else in a very specific way for their benefit, not the way that
Right.
I would want it to be explained to me, but
Right.
it's, I'm managing being a manager, I think helped even more so than anything else,
Right.
being a parent too.
Right.
Um, but like I would have to say, okay, in my case, I'd want someone to say, "Hey, the way you're doing this is like wrong. You should just do it like this and it will be more efficient."
Right.
Easy, done. But if you
Right.
say that
Yep.
to a neurotypical who's having a hard time, they're going to shut down
Yep.
and feel like you just like totally just I don't know, like you just like devastated them, like you
Right.
ruined them. And
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
you weren't intending to, you were just trying to say something logically, they got
Right.
really emotional about it. So in the beginning, I had to think, okay, how do I explain this in a way that they're gonna get a good reaction? It was like a practice. I just had to practice doing it all the time and
Right. That
thinking
makes
about it
sense.
all the time. Yeah, but now it's not based on memory. I don't have to really think about it or anticipate. I just know. I just know how to approach things. And even with autistics, I approach things similar to the way I would with neurotypicals now because also autistics don't want to feel like someone was being rude to them too, because some of them can get pretty
Right.
sensitive as well. So,
Right. Right.
um,
Anyone can.
yeah.
Yeah. So practicing putting yourself in other people's shoes and then organizing your conversations and your communications for their benefit and making a practice out of that all the time was huge. And also, you've said something about thinking in terms of systems. And I don't know if that is something that everyone would understand, but you've spoken a lot about how that has made a big difference for you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am more of a systems thinker. This one is tough though, because I don't know if it's common amongst autistics or not
Right.
like to be like that. Like I look at like I'm like pretty high problem solver. Like I try that's like on if like you take like a core values index or like something like that. I'm always high on like problem solving and strategic thinking. And that's like why I was
Right.
good in business and like what I do with my career and stuff. It's all about like thinking about a whole framework and developing systems and that sort of thing. So that type of thinking I think is probably helpful for me because I'm, like, understanding if you know, when I think about, like, a relationship with somebody, I'm thinking about, like, the whole picture versus, like, little tiny pieces of it. I do think that a lot of autistics maybe don't do this, because a lot of autistics tend to be working in roles, for example, where they're, like, uh, maybe they work, like, in, like, a big company where they develop software or something like that. If you're running a team and developing, like, the whole solution, that's usually systems thinking, but a lot of people are
Right,
doing more of, like, what would you call it? Like, higher banker
right,
following a system versus creating the system.
right.
If you're somebody who is more of a person that follows a system versus creates a system, then it's probably a different way that you have to think about things.
Yeah, so for those who may not know what systems thinking is at all, it's really about keeping in mind the idea that different components or different people affect each other in different ways. And any action that I take might affect Nick, and any action that he takes might affect me. But if we have children in our system too, so families are a system, certainly. There's usually a mother and father, there may be some children, and any action that any one person in the system takes affects the other people in the system, and then they therefore take an action based on what just happened to them. And this is something that neurotypicals and non-autistic neurodivergents generally are keeping in mind all the time, the way all of the different people in a social system affect each other, where often for autistic people, they're really more in their own mind and how is the system, or what is my experience, is maybe more
Mhm.
where a lot of autistic people stay, rather than keeping in mind everyone's experiences. And with Nick, his experience building a company and the way that he's thinking and strategic problem solving really helped, or really has, or systems are really very much alive for him, is what I'm hearing him saying. And therefore, that
Yeah.
system thinking has helped him keep in mind the many ways in which his actions are affecting other people's actions, and vice versa, the way their actions are affecting his, so that he can think through it.
I think yes, and I agree, and I think it also has helped me not fall into the trap of feeling like I'm just like a victim because
Right,
if you if you are thinking about a whole system, if you're thinking about all the when you think about a whole relationship, all the different things, how you affect people, how they affect you, what's going on around you. When you start focusing like that, it's easier to take accountability for your side of things.
right,
It's easier to
right,
see it's much easier for you to go, okay, I see, like, how I could be coming off to someone else. I see that I'm hurting someone's feelings, even if they're hurting yours as well.
right,
You can see you're part of that, and you can still hold them accountable to their part of things. It's not that you have to be the only one accountable for everything and blame yourself, but you can
right,
take accountability for your side of, conflict, for your side of issues, and then you can work on those things because we all know, like, we can control ourselves. We can't obviously control other people, and we
exactly,
shouldn't even try to, but we can control ourselves. And I think that that has helped me tremendously. Just like thinking in systems and like understanding the bigger picture has kept me out of a victim mindset because otherwise, if you don't think in systems and you just have like tunnel vision, you're not focused on everyone else and you're just thinking about your own desires, your own, your own things, you're just gonna get upset at other people when they stop you from getting to what you want, and then you're gonna
right,
feel like a victim, and then you're gonna get then there's the whole you get defensive, and then it just becomes a pattern, and it's a
right,
problem that happens where then it's like you have this partner who's annoyed at you because you have no regard for for their feelings or what you're doing or whatnot, and then they criticize you, and then you get defensive, and then it's this just battle back and forth
right,
over and over
right.
again.
And
That
this
you
is
have to understand.
keeping systems in mind at the time of divorce is really important, because in that way you can keep in mind your children's experiences and your soon to be spouse's experience and what their needs are really going to be when the marriage is over, so that your former spouse has all of the resources that they need to continue being a great parent to your children, and so that you have those too. And that's one of the great reasons to really think about systems as often as possible, but but especially when you're possibly facing divorce. I
Mm.
I mean, in my profession, I listen to many, many horror stories of what happens when an autistic partner isn't thinking of systems. And ultimately, it ends up hurting the autistic partner as much as everyone else. It's really sad. Sometimes because they're not thinking about their children's experiences or their children's need for the other parent to be happy and well taken care of in many different ways, both emotionally and financially after the divorce. The children become estranged from their autistic parents. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I've seen a bunch of that too. I totally, yeah, I've seen a bunch of like bad stories like that and whatnot. And I think it's like an extreme version of being in a victim mindset. So
right,
acting accordingly. It's like, when people act like that, when they feel like they're a victim, they will do wild things to just because they feel justified. And the
right,
problem is they're not justified and they're ruining their own life and everyone
right,
else's. So
right.
so I think that's yeah, I think that's like what the the reality here is that just because we're autistic, that doesn't have to be such a bad thing. I mean,
Right.
there can be many benefits to it. Like it can be a good thing for a lot of people. Like it's been helpful for me to just figure out what my gifts are and then what my
Hmm.
deficiencies are and then work on those
Hmm.
and use my gifts to make money. For example, like I was good at doing online paid media and I ran a really successful marketing agency. And so like that was great. And like now I've shifted and I'm good at day trading. So I'm a day trader. And like I've found ways to use like my unique way of thinking for my benefit. But getting out of the victim mindset early on is super important because I think what happens is when people are starting to go down the path of the divorce, they haven't done the self work and then they're
Right.
in that mindset already. So then they start going into the divorce and they're like, how could you do this to me? I can't believe this. How could, they just feel like there's all this stuff. And then they go down this dark path of just trying to like drag everybody down as they fall or something. And it's not pretty. But if you get out of the victim mindset and you start to look at things more clearly, you can realize that like divorce might actually be a beautiful, great option for you. And then you could
Hmm.
do it in a way that's very amicable and very like friendly. You can have a great relationship with your former partner, with your children. I mean, in my case, we were able to get divorced, remain friends. We still can hang out with each other, do things together, and it's fine. It's not rough in any way. Our kids have never seen their mom and me get into like an argument that's all heated or anything like that. Like it's not like that. So for our kids, it's been like they're having a positive experience with everything. And now it's like we have 50-50 custody. It's all very amicable and everything's good. So
Right.
you can and the thing is like sure, were there times where I felt like I was getting duped in certain ways? Yeah, of course. Like because there is. Like there's going to be times where the other person is not exactly being nice or good to you in
Yep.
certain moments. And there's going to be times where you're not either to them. And you still have to take accountability and make amends and realize that you want what's best for the mother of your kids or the father of your kids, and they want what's best for the mother or father of their kids. And you always want what's best for your kids, and you have to keep that stuff first. If you don't have kids, you still want what's best for the other person. Like you don't want them to
Right.
like you should never want them to suffer or anything like that. That was just like the wrong mindset to
R-
have. And
y-
so,
y-
yeah.
Yeah. And I see it, unfortunately. You know,
Yeah.
that's not the objective. The objective is having a happy family at the other end and being able to go on in your life with happiness and hope. And I don't know, maybe there's a sense that there is no hope anymore if your marriage ends, and that therefore is another reason to just try and lambast the family. And
Yeah.
maybe the message here is there is a lot of hope. And divorce isn't
Yeah.
the end of the world. And there are a lot of great things that can happen after divorce. And divorce can be a beautiful thing that allows both you and your partner to continue growing in the ways that you grow if you're growing in
Yeah.
different ways, which many people who got married very young are, but certainly many people who are in neurodiverse relationships, whether or not they got married very young, are, especially if they're on opposite sides of the spectrum of autism traits, one person being a high body empathy neurodivergent and the other person being an autistic. These are very, very different people who may have been attracted together at one point in time, but 10, 15 years later are very, very different people.
Yeah, totally. I think that you're right. And I think also, you know, when I think about just my own experience, like in that and going through getting divorced, all that stuff, this goes into just I remember when I was entering the dating landscape again, and it's kind of weird after if since I was with someone from when I was 19 till I was 35, is entering dating again. And I remember having friends that were in the dating world and knowing other people that were in the dating world. And one thing that I found, and this is not just specific to autistics, but I think it's just helpful in any way, is that a lot of people who have been divorced or separated or in a long-term relationship and then they weren't, or they were having problems with dating and like finding a consistent partner, even though that's what they wanted. A lot of times, one thing I noticed is that a lot of the people that were having problems attracting the right type of person were people who just hadn't really done the self work to get out of that victim mindset that we were talking about. Like I've met a lot of people like this and not throwing anyone under the bus, but I'm just saying I've met people where maybe
Right.
they're really bitter about what their divorce was like, or they're really bitter about what their last relationship was like. And it's all about how they got screwed over and all this stuff. And so instead of like working on themselves to release some of that and then to make progress, they just go into looking for new relationships with this really negative mindset around like what's happened to them and how they've been treated. And it's almost like they're creating flags that don't exist at times in these situations and like they're attracting the wrong type of partner still. And I think that it's important to know like when you do the work on yourself and you take accountability for your side of things and whatnot, you will attract a much better person for you. It will happen. And that's been my experience with it. Like I didn't have to date for very long. Like I went on, I don't know, several dates with different people. And then I met somebody pretty quickly because even in my separation, before that, I had been working on myself for a long time and
Right.
like preparing mentally for everything. So I didn't repeat bad patterns in relationships and start attracting partners that were bad for me and all that. Like I was able to find someone that was actually really great for me. And so I think that that's the case for I think autistic people and neurotypicals and
Mhm.
whatnot and other types of neurodivergent people. As long as you work on yourself and take accountability, you'll eventually find the right type of you'll attract the right type of partner for you.
Right. Yeah. And life isn't all about doom and gloom, regardless of
No.
what kind of neurodivergency you may or may not have. I mean, there's a lot of diversity, and I think it's really exciting to be learning about neurodiversity finally in the 21st century to get a lot of answers to the questions that many of us have been grappling with for a long time about what's been going on in our families. And
Yeah.
we can use it to help us. We can use this information to get us to better places, not to feel like, okay, my life is over now that I know this about myself.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Any final words, Nick?
I don't think that I have anything else, but it's been cool to talk about all this. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's been good. If you ever want me to come on again, happy to do it.
Definitely, definitely. We'll get the podcast really going and moving, and then, yeah, absolutely. Again, I am Anne McMillan from realneurodiverse.com, and this has been the Neurodiverse Connection podcast, and I've been here with my friend Nick. So thanks so much. Glad to have you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you.